I had always believed that no matter what happened, my parents would have my back. I thought that when the time came, I'd be the one they'd turn to for support, for their legacy. But then came the day I received the letter that shattered everything. It wasn't from my parents directly. It was from their lawyer. I had to read it twice before the words even made sense. You have been removed from the will. Just like that. No warning, no explanation. I couldn't help but wonder what I'd done wrong. I spent years trying to please them, trying to make them proud, but somehow it wasn't enough. The letter felt like a cold slap in the face, the kind that makes you question everything about your relationship with someone. I felt empty, numb, as I sat on the couch staring at the paper. How could they do this? What was I missing? The thoughts swirled around in my head, making it harder to breathe. I needed some time to process it. Later that night, I stood by the window in my small apartment, looking out over the city lights. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And as I stared out, I realized I had nothing to lose. It hit me. Maybe their decision was just the final step in a long line of choices they'd made to keep me at arm's length. I had spent years trying to build some kind of relationship with them, but it always felt one-sided. My attempts were met with distant nods or brief conversations. I could never really get close to them. I had always wondered if it was me. Had I been too much? Or not enough? I'd long ago stopped seeking their approval because it had become clear they weren't capable of giving it. Still, being disinherited felt like the final rejection, the one that cut deeper than all the years of distance. But just as I was about to let the weight of it all consume me, something caught my eye. It was a letter. Not from my parents, but from Grandma. I hadn't seen her in months, but she'd always been a presence in my life, someone who was always kind and supportive. I opened the letter, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was a will, but not like the one my parents had drawn up. Grandma's last wish was that I receive something that my parents had tried to keep hidden from me. She had left me her house, her savings, and a small piece of advice. You're stronger than they think, Riley. Don't let anyone define your worth, she had written. The words hit me like a wave. It wasn't just about the house or the money, it was the message. Grandma had always believed in me, even when my parents didn't. She had seen something in me that they hadn't. The house, an old cottage on the outskirts of town, wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of her belief in me. I held on to that feeling, wrapping myself in it like a blanket, knowing that for once, I had someone who truly cared. With this new revelation, something inside me shifted. I wasn't the helpless child they thought I was. I wasn't the one they could just cast aside. I began making plans. It wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about taking control of my life. I knew I couldn't just let this go. I began reaching out to the lawyer who had managed Grandma's will, making sure that everything was in order and that no one could take what was rightfully mine. Meanwhile, my mind raced. How had my parents failed to see me? Was it their pride, their fear of being outdone by someone they had always seen as a disappointment? I couldn't answer that, but I wasn't about to let them get away with this. I'd spent so many years trying to fit into their world, always walking on eggshells, and now I was done. I was ready to move forward and start something new. But as I made my preparations, the calls from my parents started. First, it was my mom, asking what was going on, why I wasn't responding. Then it was my dad, his voice sounding strangely apologetic, almost as though he expected me to beg them to change their minds. I didn't answer. I had no intention of playing their game anymore. It was clear that they wanted me to grovel, to beg for their approval. But I had already spent too much time in that place, fighting for scraps of their love. It wasn't worth it. My grandmother had given me a gift, one that wasn't just material, but emotional. She had shown me that I didn't need to depend on anyone but myself, and that was a revelation I wasn't going to ignore. As the weeks passed, I settled into the cottage and began making it my own. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I took small steps, fixing things, decorating, getting to know the quiet surroundings. Slowly, I started to rebuild myself. I realized that I had spent too much of my life worrying about what my parents thought, letting their expectations and judgments control my every move. But now, with Grandma's guidance, I could see the truth. I was more than enough. I was capable of standing on my own. I was capable of creating my own future, one where I was in control. The thought of what they had done to me still stung, but it wasn't enough to hold me back anymore. One day, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom, her tone frantic. "Riley, we've made a mistake. We didn't mean to leave you out. Please come back." It was a last-ditch attempt, an effort to regain some control. But this time, I didn't feel the need to respond. I wasn't angry anymore, just indifferent. Their attempt to reel me back in wasn't enough to change anything. They had already made their choice, and now I was making mine. My life was moving forward without them. And as I thought about all that I had gained from Grandma's last wish, I realized that the true inheritance wasn't just the house or money. It was the knowledge that I could take care of myself, no matter what. And that was something my parents would never be able to take from me. The days passed, and slowly I began to feel the weight of my decision. It wasn't as easy as I had hoped. While the house gave me space and comfort, there were moments when I felt the sting of the betrayal creeping in. I would walk through the rooms of Grandma's cottage, feeling a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. The furniture was old, worn, but it carried a sense of warmth that the sterile, cold house my parents owned never had. The walls seemed to whisper with memories of Grandma's love and wisdom. It was comforting, but it also reminded me of how long I had been disconnected from my family. They hadn't just disinherited me from their will, they had disinherited me from their lives. But even in the quiet of my new home, the calls didn't stop. My dad, my mom, they kept trying to reach me. I couldn't escape the guilt that gnawed at me every time I saw their name flash on my phone screen. It wasn't just about the money, or the house, or even the will anymore. It was about the family I'd lost, and the relationship I'd never had. My parents weren't the kind of people who apologized easily. They weren't the kind of people who admitted they were wrong. And I knew that, deep down, the reason they kept calling wasn't because they cared. It was because they wanted control. They wanted me back in their lives, but only on their terms. And I wasn't going to let that happen. One afternoon, while sitting in the sunroom with a cup of tea, I decided it was time to stop waiting. I had spent enough of my life just reacting to things, waiting for someone else to make the first move. I had learned from Grandma. I needed to take control, to decide my future, not let my past dictate it. So I reached out to the lawyer she had left me, the one who had managed the estate and all of Grandma's legal matters. I wanted to make sure everything was in order. I had to ensure that no one, especially my parents, could take what was rightfully mine. I didn't trust that they would let things go easily, not when there was money involved. I felt a calm determination wash over me as I made the call. Grandma had been so organized, so methodical about everything. It felt like she had left me more than just material wealth. She had given me a sense of purpose. That evening, as I lay in bed, I thought about the future, what it might look like now that I had this unexpected foundation beneath me. I wasn't sure what the next steps would be, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let my parents or anyone else control my narrative anymore. I was finally going to write my own story. But that night, as the moonlight streamed through the window, I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't unusual for someone to come by. I had some neighbors, people who knew about the house, and of course, word had started to spread about the inheritance. But when I opened the door, it wasn't a neighbor standing there. It was my mom, her face drawn with worry and desperation. I hadn't expected her to show up at my doorstep, not after everything. I need to talk to you, Riley, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to slam the door and never speak to her again, but another part, the part that had been missing all these years, wanted to hear what she had to say. So, I let her in. I couldn't help but wonder what had changed. What had happened that made her come here, to my door, after all the years of silence and distance? We sat in the living room, the silence hanging between us like a thick fog. She was struggling to find the right words, her eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. The tension was palpable. I didn't rush her to speak. I waited. Finally, she broke the silence. Riley, she began, her voice low, I've been thinking about everything, about the will, about what we've done. I watched her closely, trying to read her expression. Was she sorry? Did she regret it? Was this all just an attempt to make herself feel better? I had no idea. But what I did know was that I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. She had done something unforgivable by writing me out of their will, by treating me like an outsider in my own family. I don't know what you expected me to do, Mom, I said, my voice steady but firm. You made your decision. You wrote me off like I was nothing, and now you want to make it right? Just like that? Her eyes welled with tears. I'm sorry, Riley. I'm sorry for everything. We were wrong. We should have been there for you. I took a deep breath, the weight of her words pressing on my chest. I wanted to believe her, but I didn't. Not yet. Maybe one day, but not now. Not when the hurt was still too fresh. I'm not here for your apology, Mom, I said, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. I'm here to make my own way, and I will, without you. The words stung, but they felt right. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I had a life to live, and it wasn't going to include them holding the strings anymore. She left quietly, her presence lingering in the air like a forgotten memory. I stood in the doorway, watching her walk away. She didn't turn around, and I didn't expect her to. It was a moment of finality, one I knew would change everything. And as I closed the door behind me, I realized something. The hurt from the past would never fully go away, but it didn't have to define me. I had a future ahead of me, one that was full of possibilities. My grandmother had given me a second chance, a chance to live on my own terms. And I was going to take it, no matter what. The next chapter of my life was waiting, and this time, I was the one who held the pen. The following weeks weren't easy. Despite the sense of peace I felt after my mom left that day, there were moments when the weight of everything would catch up with me. I'd sit by the window, watching the world outside move along, while I was stuck in a whirlwind of confusion, frustration, and a strange sense of liberation. I had the house, I had the savings, and I had the legal rights Grandma had left me. But it felt like something was missing. I wasn't sure what I expected. Closure, maybe, or a sense of relief. But all I could feel was the gaping hole left by my family's abandonment. It wasn't just about money or the inheritance. It was about being written out of their lives completely. The emptiness gnawed at me. It was as if I was standing on the edge of something huge, but I couldn't yet see what was on the other side. Then, as I settled into the cottage, things started to change. I got busy, really busy. I had always loved interior design, and now I had an entire house to turn into my vision. I painted the walls, bought new furniture, and put my heart into making it my home. It was therapeutic, and slowly, the sadness faded, replaced by a quiet pride. I found myself breathing easier in my new space. My mind also began to settle. I started making plans for the future. My grandmother's old house wasn't just a place to live. It was a foundation, a starting point. It could be my fresh beginning. For the first time in years, I was thinking about what I wanted, not what anyone else expected from me. But the calls didn't stop. My mom would call, and every time, I ignored it. I didn't need her apologies. I didn't need her guilt. It was clear to me that this wasn't just about reconciling. This was about my own journey. A few days later, my dad left a voicemail. "Riley, I know we've made mistakes," he said, his voice unusually soft. "But we're family. Please don't shut us out. We need to talk." I listened to his words but didn't respond. What could he say that would change anything? I already knew the truth. I had spent my entire life trying to win their approval, trying to meet their expectations, and now that I had finally freed myself from their grip, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. Part of me was tempted to call them, to hear them beg, to finally get the validation I had always craved. But I didn't. The realization hit me harder than I expected. I didn't need them to define who I was. I was defining myself now. As the days went on, I felt more and more empowered. I realized that Grandma's last wish wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about giving me the opportunity to start over. And as I worked on fixing up the house, my vision for the future began to grow. I'd always been interested in running my own business, but I had never had the means to do so. Now, with a little capital and a place to call my own, I could finally pursue my dream. I started looking into small business ideas, researching the local market, and planning out the next steps. One morning, I woke up with a sudden clarity that had been missing before. I didn't want just any business. I wanted a business that represented who I was, something that would show people what I was capable of, despite what anyone had ever believed. I decided to open a small boutique. It wasn't a huge risk, but it was enough to start building something from the ground up, and it would be mine, completely mine. The idea took hold, and I couldn't shake it. I began drafting a business plan, reaching out to suppliers, and figuring out the logistics. I had always loved fashion, but I hadn't pursued it because I was too busy trying to prove myself in other ways. But now, with Grandma's inheritance behind me and the freedom to create something of my own, I felt like I could finally do what I had always wanted. As I worked tirelessly to set up my new business, my mind occasionally drifted back to my parents. The feeling of being betrayed still stung, but I had started to realize something important. The most important relationship I needed to focus on was the one I had with myself. I had spent years chasing approval from them, from a family who didn't even know how to show love in the way I needed. But now, I was learning to love myself, to trust myself, and to build something that was truly my own. That realization was worth more than anything my parents could have left me. The first few weeks in the cottage were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and countless hours of work. But with each passing day, I grew more and more excited about what was to come. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was designing a future that belonged entirely to me. And with every step, I felt the weight of my past becoming lighter and lighter until it no longer felt like a burden, but a distant memory. My future was waiting, and this time, I was the one in control. The day my boutique finally opened was nothing short of exhilarating. It wasn't a grand opening, nothing flashy, just a simple ribbon cutting and a soft opening to see how things would go. But to me, it felt like a new chapter of my life. The small shop was tucked into a corner of the downtown area, a place I had always walked by and dreamed about. Now, it was mine. The window displays were carefully curated, showcasing a mix of vintage and modern pieces. I had poured my heart into every detail, making sure it felt inviting yet unique. The soft scent of fresh flowers, the gentle lighting, and the carefully chosen music gave the place a warmth I hadn't even realized I was craving. When the first few customers walked in, I could hardly believe it. They wandered through the aisles, picking up clothes, admiring the jewelry, and trying on pieces. There were moments when I caught myself just standing there, watching them, in awe. This was my dream taking shape. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but the satisfaction of seeing my work paying off made every sleepless night and every dollar spent worth it. It felt good to know that this wasn't just something I was doing for someone else. It was for me. It was all mine. In the following weeks, the shop began to gain traction. Word of mouth spread, and soon, I had a steady stream of customers. Some came for the clothes, others for the experience. I was starting to build a reputation, not just for my boutique, but for myself. I wasn't just the person who had been written out of a will. I was the woman who was turning her life around, creating something beautiful out of the ashes of betrayal. People began to notice, and not just for the clothes I sold, but for the story behind them. The story of how I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my future. But of course, my parents didn't just disappear. Every now and then, I'd get a text or a call. The messages were always the same, pleading for forgiveness, for a chance to make things right. They would apologize for their mistakes, but I never responded. I had made it clear to myself that I was done with the old dynamic. I couldn't allow myself to get caught up in their web of guilt anymore. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about moving forward. I had nothing to prove to them. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, expecting it to be another call from my mom, but this time, it wasn't. It was a call from a magazine, a local business magazine that had caught wind of my boutique's success. They wanted to feature me in their next issue. I was speechless for a moment, not sure how to process it. Me? In a magazine? Just a few months ago, I was sitting alone in a small, quiet house, wondering how I was going to move forward. And now, I was being recognized for something I had built from nothing. The call confirmed what I had always believed deep down. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The feature turned out to be even better than I expected. The magazine didn't just talk about the clothes or the store itself. They told my story. They told the story of a woman who had been cast aside by her family, but had found a way to reinvent herself. It wasn't just about the boutique. It was about reclaiming my life, my sense of purpose, and my independence. The article went live, and soon after, I started receiving messages and calls from other small business owners, entrepreneurs, and even some customers who had read the story. People who were inspired, people who saw me as a symbol of resilience. For the first time, I felt seen. Not by my parents, but by the people who mattered, the ones who saw what I had built, the ones who understood the hard work, the late nights, and the sacrifices that had gone into creating this life. I wasn't just a victim of my family's decisions. I was a woman who had taken control of her own destiny and had found success on her own terms. But success didn't come without its own challenges. As my business grew, so did the pressure. I was learning as I went along, making mistakes and facing obstacles I hadn't anticipated. There were days when I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and frustrated. But each time I hit a roadblock, I reminded myself why I was doing this. I wasn't just building a business. I was proving to myself that I could do anything, no matter what anyone, least of all my parents, thought of me. It wasn't long before the success of the boutique began to get attention beyond just the local level. Other cities were starting to take notice. I received offers from various suppliers, collaborations from other stores, and even a few calls from investors. The potential seemed endless, but I wasn't getting ahead of myself. I took things one step at a time, making sure I stayed grounded in the values that had gotten me here in the first place. I wanted this success to be built on hard work and integrity, not shortcuts or compromises. As I worked tirelessly to expand the business, I couldn't help but think back to that letter from my grandmother. Her belief in me had been the catalyst for everything that had happened. If she hadn't left me her inheritance, I never would have had the opportunity to start the boutique. But more than that, she had given me something priceless: confidence. Confidence in my ability to handle whatever life threw my way, and confidence that I could build something that was entirely my own. I spent the following months continuing to grow the boutique, opening a second location and expanding my online presence. It wasn't just about the clothes anymore. It was about the brand I had created, a brand built on the lessons I had learned, a brand that stood for resilience, strength, and the power of taking control of your own story. Every new step felt like a victory, and each one brought me closer to the life I had always wanted. A life where I didn't have to rely on anyone else's validation to feel worthy. A life where I knew I could achieve anything I set my mind to. And as I looked around the second location, I realized just how far I had come. From the broken girl who had been left out in the cold by her family, to the woman standing tall, running a successful business, I had found my place in the world. And nothing, not even my parents, could take that away from me. The momentum was undeniable. The boutique was thriving, and with every new order, every new customer, I felt like I was carving out my space in the world. People were beginning to recognize the story behind the business, and it resonated with them. The idea of a woman who had been betrayed but still managed to build something incredible, something all her own, was inspiring. My success wasn't just personal, it became a beacon for others who had faced adversity and wanted to overcome it. I started getting messages from people, mostly women, who shared their own stories of struggle, of betrayal, of coming out on the other side stronger than before. It was humbling. They saw me as someone who had made it, someone they could relate to. And it made me realize that, despite everything I had gone through, I was exactly where I was meant to be. But as my business grew, so did the complications. With success came new challenges. Managing a second location, expanding the online store, and handling the increasing demand for the boutique's products kept me on my toes. I hired new employees, a team I could trust to help me bring my vision to life. I learned quickly that being a business owner wasn't just about having a great idea. It was about being adaptable, being strategic, and knowing when to ask for help. But even as I navigated these new challenges, one thing was certain. I was building something lasting, something that would outlive the family who had once rejected me. The calls from my parents didn't stop. They came in waves, each one more desperate than the last. My mom would reach out, then my dad, always trying to re-enter my life as though nothing had happened. At first it bothered me, the constant intrusion into my newfound peace. But after a while, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I had moved on. The resentment I had once carried with me had melted away, not because I had forgiven them, but because I had learned to let go. The more I focused on my business and the people who truly cared about me, the less I felt their absence. One afternoon, while I was in the middle of unpacking a new shipment of merchandise, I got a message from my lawyer. It was a simple update about the final steps in the legal proceedings over my inheritance. My parents, it seemed, had tried to contest the will again, trying to argue that they had been unfairly cut out. I wasn't surprised. They had always been like that, never willing to accept that their actions had consequences. But this time, there was no drama, no argument. The lawyer's message simply stated that the court had dismissed their claims. The inheritance was mine, and there would be no further legal action. The news felt like a weight had been lifted. I didn't even feel the need to respond to them. Not this time. It wasn't about rubbing it in their faces or proving anything. It was about knowing that the path I was on was my own, and it didn't need their approval or their involvement. I had everything I needed to move forward, and I was doing it on my terms. As my business continued to grow, I found myself reflecting more on my past, on everything that had led me to this point. I thought about the day I found Grandma's letter and how it had changed everything. I thought about the pain, the betrayal, and the emptiness I had felt when my parents wrote me out of their will. But most of all, I thought about how far I had come since then. I had turned the worst possible situation into the greatest opportunity of my life. The business wasn't just a means of financial independence. It was a symbol of my strength, my resilience, and my refusal to let anyone, not even my own parents, define who I was. And then came another unexpected call. This time, it wasn't from my parents. It was from Melissa, the woman who had once been my ex-husband, Mark's girlfriend. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since the final hearing of my divorce. I had always been polite, but there had been a distance between us. But now, she was calling. I hesitated for a moment before picking up. "Hi, Riley." Her voice sounded different, less uncertain, more grounded. "I just wanted to apologize. I don't know if you remember me, but I've been following your success, and I really admire what you've built." I wasn't sure how to respond. This was the woman who had once been part of the betrayal, the one who had unknowingly been caught up in Mark's lies and manipulation. But there was something in her voice that made me pause. She wasn't trying to make excuses or blame anyone else. She was just acknowledging my journey. It took me a moment to gather my thoughts. "I remember you, Melissa," I said, my tone neutral. "Thank you for reaching out." She hesitated before speaking again, her voice soft but sincere. "I've learned a lot in the past few months, about what really matters, and about the kind of person I want to be. When I first met you, I didn't understand your story, and I didn't know the full picture, but I see it now. And I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had never expected an apology from her. In some way, I had assumed she would just move on with her life, and I would move on with mine, our paths never crossing again. But hearing her speak so honestly, without any pretense, made me realize something important. I had spent so much of my life holding on to grudges, to the pain caused by others. But here, in this moment, I could choose not to hold on to that anger anymore. "I appreciate your apology, Melissa," I said, feeling the tension in my chest loosen. "And I'm glad you're finding your way too." There was a pause, and I could hear her take a deep breath on the other end of the line. "You've inspired me, Riley. You really have." I didn't say anything for a moment. The old me, the hurt and angry version of me, would have held on to the resentment, would have made her feel guilty for being part of my pain. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had learned to let go, to move forward, and to find my own path. "Take care, Melissa," I said softly before hanging up. As I set my phone down, I realized just how far I had come. I wasn't just building a business, I was building a life that was truly my own. And with each step, I knew that I was finally in control of my future, one where no one's mistakes could ever define me again. Months passed, and with each day, my life grew more vibrant, more full of promise. The boutique had become more than just a business. It had become my identity, a reflection of my journey, my strength, and my resilience. What had started as a small store in a quiet corner of town had expanded into a thriving brand, with a second location and a growing online presence. The sense of pride that came from seeing my hard work paying off never got old. I had transformed a painful chapter of my life into something beautiful, something lasting. I often thought about the people who had helped me get here, the customers who believed in my vision, the team I had built around me, and even Melissa, who had reached out with an unexpected apology. But I also thought about Grandma. I wished she could see how far I had come, how much her final wish had changed my life. Her belief in me had given me the courage to rebuild, to reclaim my independence, and to trust in myself when no one else did. I had become the woman she had always seen in me. The success of the boutique wasn't just measured in dollars or customers. It was measured in the quiet confidence I had gained, in the peace I had found within myself. One evening, as I sat in the office of my second boutique, reviewing sales reports and planning the next steps for the business, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my lawyer. I had almost forgotten about the pending court matters, the small legal battles that still lingered from my inheritance and the attempts my parents had made to contest the will. But now, with everything that had happened, I wasn't worried about it anymore. The message read, "Riley, I wanted to update you on the final legal proceedings. Your parents' last attempt to contest the will has been dismissed. The case is closed." I set the phone down slowly. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely unburdened by them. The final chapter was over. My parents had tried to hold on to their control over me in every way they knew how, through their money, through their guilt, through their judgments. But they couldn't do it anymore. The battle was theirs to lose, not mine to fight. They had already lost me, but I had gained something far more valuable: my own sense of purpose, my own future, and my own happiness. The next day, I stood in the original boutique, looking out the window at the bustling street outside. I had come a long way from the woman who had once stood alone, unsure of how she was going to move forward. Now I stood there with a thriving business, a solid team, and a future that was finally mine to shape. The phone calls from my parents still came now and then, but I didn't feel the need to answer them anymore. I had my own life, my own direction. I wasn't the person they had written off. I was the woman I had always been capable of becoming. And then, as if on cue, Melissa walked into the store, looking almost exactly the same as the first time I had seen her. Young, confident, but with a different air about her. She had changed. I could see it in the way she carried herself, in the way she walked into the boutique with purpose. She approached the counter, where I stood, and we exchanged a brief, knowing smile. "Hi, Riley," she said softly. "I just wanted to say, I've been thinking about everything, about what you've done. You really are something else." I didn't know what to say at first, but then it clicked. We were two women who had learned the same lesson: the value of independence, the power of resilience, and the importance of knowing our own worth. And we were both stronger for it. "I'm just doing what I've always known I could do," I said, my voice calm but filled with certainty. "Building something real, something that lasts." Melissa nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I see that now. I admire you for it." And in that moment, I realized that my journey wasn't just about building a business or proving something to my parents. It was about showing myself and everyone else that I was capable of standing tall on my own. I had taken the broken pieces of my life and turned them into something strong, something beautiful. Later that evening, as I sat at my desk, reflecting on everything that had led me here, I couldn't help but smile. My life was no longer defined by the past, by my parents' rejection, or the betrayal I had faced. It was defined by the woman I had become, the woman who had the strength to let go of the pain, the courage to build her own future, and the wisdom to know that success wasn't about getting even. It was about getting better. 5 years after my parents' cruel decision to write me out of their will, I had not only rebuilt my life, I had created something more than I ever could have imagined. My boutique was thriving, my name was recognized, and I was living a life of my own making. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning. The best was yet to come. As I closed the door to the boutique that night, locking it behind me, I felt a quiet satisfaction wash over me. The world was mine for the taking, and nothing, no one, could ever take that away from me again.